if most of us were to do a word association exercise with the word confrontation, my guess is that we would list off a bunch of negative words like uncomfortable, awkward, terrible, angry, mean, embarrassing, horrible, terrible. You get the idea. Even though research has shown that speaking in public is one of people's greatest fears, I am sure that confronting someone is a close second. No one likes to be confronted, and no one likes to do the confronting. So why would this be an entire chapter in Jackie Lewis's book on fierce love? And what about the adage, it's better to be in relationship than to be right? How does that square with confrontation? Doesn't confrontation imply that one person may think they are right? What this chapter on confrontation highlights is that sometimes, in order to be in authentic relationship with someone, confrontation is necessary. Despite how much we dislike confrontation, sometimes it can be the most fiercely loving thing we do with someone. One of my first experiences with loving confrontation was when I was a freshman in college. I was at a small conservative Christian college, and I lived on a floor with all women. I was an athlete all through high school, and I was on the volleyball team in college. I was also there on a leadership scholarship. Why are those things important? They're important because they describe a kind of culture in which I grew up. Sports was part of that culture, and the kind of ideal I was being held to and supposed to be living called leadership. One night after our dorm floor had a meeting with our resident assistant, Kathy, she asked me if I would stay after the meeting. I stayed. I was completely unsuspecting, and she told me that she wanted to talk to me about a concern she had about me. She had noticed that my sarcasm could be quite funny and that I often got a lot of laughs from people. And then she said, "I'm not sure if you know this, but your sarcasm also hurts people." She gave me some examples, and I was surprised. I just thought I was funny. Like with a lot of confrontation, I felt embarrassed, I felt a little shame, I felt uncomfortable. But at the same time, I was so glad she told me, because I don't think I was aware that I had been hurting people. And it certainly was not my intention to ever hurt other people. Kathy was kind as she told me, and she was also very serious. She was really concerned for me and the people I was hurting. After my initial discomfort and embarrassment, I felt gratitude to her for being honest with me. Imagine if she had thought that about me and then kept it to herself. Over time, she would have liked me less and less, and our relationship would have suffered. I took her words to heart, and though I think I can still be pretty funny sometimes, I try to say and do things that are not hurtful to others. She loved me fiercely enough to be willing to confront me about my harmful behavior. It's hard to think that way because it feels so counterintuitive, but how many people do you love enough to be willing to confront? In her book, Jackie Lewis talks about confronting her dad, when her dad ruins her graduation day when she received her doctorate and completely ignores and is rude to her white friend John, who is now her husband. She describes the years of built-up anger and hurt and talks about how she reached a point where she realized she no longer wanted to be in relationship with her dad if he was unwilling to change his behavior. What she describes is not someone who's just going to walk away from a relationship because of one thing that made her mad or because of political differences or behavior she disapproves of in a moment. Instead, she describes a long history with her dad and how his behavior, particularly his anger, has impacted her. She loves her dad very much and desires to be in relationship with him, but she will no longer suffer because of him. So she confronts him. In her truth-telling with him, she is careful to tell him that she wants a relationship with him because she loves him very much. She is also careful to tell him that the behavior she is no longer willing to accept. And then she is clear about what her request is of him. He needs to change his behavior or she will be unable to be in relationship with him. And then she talks about what that means. She's not mean in this conversation. She doesn't insult him. She's not sarcastic or self-righteous. She is assertive in her communication with him, and then she leaves him to consider what has been said. When he tries to interrupt her to deny what she is saying, she asks him to stop talking and tells him it is her turn to talk. Even just reading it will make conflict-averse people very uncomfortable. But it's actually a loving and lovely interchange. Have you ever had anyone in your life who loved you enough to be willing to confront you? I'm not talking about when one of your siblings decides to unload on you one day and screams at you about all the ways you're horrible. That's not the kind of confrontation I'm talking about. That's not actually a confrontation. The kind of confrontation that is needed as we consider being fierce lovers in this world is the kind of confrontation that leads to deeper awareness and deeper relationship. It is not the kind that leads to emotional annihilation. In all of my activism and organizing, I've shared with you before that I cannot tolerate when speakers get up or when marchers are shouting horrible things about a particular person. I will not and do not attack individual people through my activism. I might join in on a chant that says a particular politician needs to go, but I won't chant insults of any kind. I believe in the kind of confrontation that is productive and that can lead to spiritual growth, both people's spiritual growth. Some of you know that I have done more than my fair share of confronting in terms of the systems and groups I am a part of. I've also done some confronting of individuals in my life, and even on occasion with some of you in this congregation. And some of you have also confronted me on occasion. When you do, I feel it as a confirmation of relationship and shared love. Most people point to the cleansing of the temple as the one example of Jesus' confrontation skills. I would argue that turning over the tables and letting the animals loose was not confrontation, but a genuine show of righteous anger. When I think of whether or not Jesus confronted people, I tend to think of the encounters and relationships and conversations and experiences Jesus had with people. I tend to think of Jesus with the rich young ruler, or our story today of Jesus with the woman at the well in Samaria. There are several aspects of this confrontation, or conversation, as some might call it, that I think are interesting. The first thing that stands out is that Jesus, who is male and a Jew, talks to this woman who is not a Jew, but in fact is a Samaritan. All kinds of boundaries and cultural expectations are crossed just in this one act. The woman is surprised and asks Jesus why he is talking to her and asking for a drink. Is it possible she is doing her own confronting? Jesus answers by saying, if she knew who was asking, she would ask for living water. She responds by asking how he would give it to her. Since he doesn't have a bucket, she actually has the bucket, and the well is deep. We often skip right over this part, but it seems like she is challenging him and letting him know that in this moment, he depends upon her because she's the one with the bucket. Unless, of course, he is greater than Jacob. Jesus responds by saying that everyone who drinks the well water is just going to end up being thirsty again, which could be him letting her know he is not dependent upon her. But everyone who drinks the water that Jesus gives will never be thirsty again. The woman asks Jesus to give her some of the water he gives so that she will never be thirsty again and will never have to go to the well again. Whether she knows it or not, she's giving Jesus information about herself. There is a reason she is at the well at noon, the hottest part of the day, instead of in the cool of the morning or the evening with all of the other women. She would prefer not ever having to come again. Jesus picks up on that and tells her to go get her husband and come back. She tells Jesus she doesn't have a husband. Jesus tells her, in his own way, that while she has spoken the truth, she has not spoken the whole truth. She has had 5 husbands, and she is currently living with a man not her husband. Now, isn't it interesting that he doesn't then lecture her on how many husbands she's had or that she's not married to this one she's living with? That's not what Jesus is concerned about. After a little more back and forth, Jesus reveals himself to her and lets her know that he is the Christ, the sent one. So how is this a confrontation? Or what elements does it have that make it a confrontation? Jesus begins from a place of discomfort. He crosses boundaries so they are both out of their comfort zones. Jesus cares for this woman, or he wouldn't have engaged in conversation with her and been vulnerable with her or invited her into her own vulnerability. Jesus doesn't accept truth that is not the full truth. Jesus tells her the truth about herself and then about himself in order for her to be healed and restored to her community, where, as a woman living with a man outside of a contract, surely she was ostracized and despised. Confrontation that is from a place of fierce love is something that can lead to healing, reconciliation, awareness, and deepened relationships. Confrontation that is loving will invite people to be their best and most authentic selves. Confrontation is not about telling someone what you don't like about them. It's not about telling someone all the ways you wish they could be different. It's not about blaming someone for something or shaming someone for something. Jesus didn't do any of those things in this encounter with the woman at the well. For many years when I was younger, I taught workshops on assertive communication. I was always amazed by how many people equated the word assertive with the words aggressive and angry. Assertive communication means that when you talk with someone, you are clear and direct, and you respect and care for not only the other person, but for yourself as well. So there is mutual care and respect. And so many encounters, there is a winner, which is considered to be the person who most forcefully got their point across and gets their way, and a loser, the one who does not get their way or who does not get their point across. With assertive communication, both people win because both people get to speak, both people get to feel cared for, and both people are respected. What I found in leading these workshops is that many people went in thinking they were really good communicators, and then realized they were not using assertive communication, but either used aggressive or passive-aggressive communication. It's hard to change something when you're not even aware you're doing it. Sarcasm is a form of aggressive communication. In the scenario of mutual respect and care, when you engage in sarcasm, you are not respecting or caring for the other person. But it's harmless most of the time, you might say. But it's not honest, I would say back. Expressing anger is not necessarily aggressive, but it's difficult for someone in the throes of anger to be clear and respectful and caring in communication. It can happen, and it can also easily go awry. Anytime you engage in shaming or blaming or name-calling or insulting, you are being aggressive in communication. Interestingly, many people fall more toward the passive or passive-aggressive spectrum. In passive communication, you are not respecting or caring for yourself because you're not sharing your truth or being honest about what you need or want. In passive-aggressive communication, you're not respecting or caring for either the other person or yourself because you're not being honest, and typically you're hurting the other person at the same time. When we communicate in any way other than using assertive communication, chances are both people or groups will walk away dissatisfied with the results. I want to use an example with you so that you will begin to understand the differences between each of these types. So here's a universal example that could certainly apply here at church. And it's related to wearing a face mask indoors. And how do you confront someone who is not wearing a mask or who is wearing it down by their chin? So an assertive confrontation would be this. I've noticed that when you come inside, You move your face mask down and it doesn't cover your mouth and nose. I feel afraid to be near you when you do that, and even to come to church. Would you be willing to keep it up while you're inside in order to protect all of us? That's an assertive way to confront that person. Here's aggressive. Can't you read? Didn't you see the sign that says face masks must be worn inside? You think you're royalty and somehow exempt? I'm guessing those actual words have been spoken during this whole thing, but who knows? Maybe not here, I don't think. Here's passive. One of my good friends was sick for 4 months with COVID. I sure hope I don't get sick. And then here's passive aggressive. Well, maybe we should all just pull down our masks and breathe all over everyone so that we can all just get sick and build up antibodies. Part of what makes confrontation so difficult is that we tend to have good intentions as we begin it, and then when somebody reacts or gets really defensive, we get caught right up in mirroring the other person. So if someone insults us while we are confronting, it's really tough not to throw it right back. Maybe you've experienced this when you've honked your horn at someone and they've responded quite aggressively to you. I once taught this workshop to a group of volunteers when I was working with hospice. And the volunteers that I was teaching this particular day were all women for some reason, and all over the age of 65. And there was one woman who was in her late 70s, and when we were doing the role playing, she says, I have an example that I would love to role play. It is the thing that bothers me the most in my life. And so she began to tell the group about how she and her husband had been married for more than 50 years. And every morning she made him breakfast. And every morning he would come into the kitchen and sit down for breakfast and hold up the newspaper and proceed to read the newspaper while he was eating his breakfast. And she said, I have tried everything to get him to stop. I've huffed and puffed. I've ignored him for a week. I've made half the amount of breakfast. I've said I'm not going to make the breakfast. She said, I've tried everything. And still every morning he comes in. And she said, it's really beginning to impact me in ways that I probably don't even know. And I'm so angry with him every day because that's how we start our day. Well, what a great, great situation to role play. So we role played it, and she learned how she could lovingly confront him. So it was a month in between our training sessions. And so she came back the next month, and when she walked in the door, she looked like a different human being. She came in, she was smiling. She said, I can't wait to tell you all what happened. So we put everything else aside and we let her tell us what happened. And she said, I said it just the way we practice it, and you're not going to believe this. He was so sorry. He had no idea, despite all those clues that I had given him over the last 50 years, he had no idea how hurt I was by this. And he said he loves talking to me, and he hasn't picked up the newspaper since. That is the kind of life-changing, it literally changed her life. The kind of life-changing results that can happen when we love someone fiercely and are willing to do some bold confrontation, assertively, not aggressively or passively aggressive. We're living in one of the most polarized times in history. In addition to cancel culture, we're living with the advent of social media. We can express anger and frustration and hurt in ways that involve huge crowds of people where there's very little responsibility on our part. If someone comes to this church and feels offended by something I do or say, they can simply write a scathing review, and when others read it, they might believe it and stay away. And that feels powerful for people. One of the ways we can transform our world with fierce love is by knowing how to do and being committed to loving confrontation. Here in this congregation, we are a small community. We are committed to each other, as well as being committed to following Jesus and to continually invite others to also come and follow Jesus. At the heart of community life and living is the willingness to confront another when we have been hurt or offended or wronged in any way. Communities that know how to do this are communities that flourish. There are no long-standing resentments that show up or that come out in conversation when no one is expecting it. We are called as followers of Jesus to live in this way and to model this way of living and being for others. May we be transformed and become transformers as we fiercely love by confronting when necessary. Amen.